Hello everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to dive into a story filled with quiet tension, buried doubts, and the fragile line between trust and suspicion. From an unexpected encounter at a crowded market to a growing conflict inside a family, this story unfolds through part 1 and part 2 as emotions collide, secrets begin to surface, and one name slowly becomes the center of a looming storm. Is it just intuition? Or is there a carefully hidden plan at work? Stay with us as we explore every twist and unanswered question. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos. Thomas's sudden reappearance shattered Huyen's sense of calm. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a shocking confession, just a fleeting moment at the market, a glance that lingered a second too long, a seemingly harmless question that quietly lodged itself in her mind. Yet from that instant on, unease spread through her like a slow-burning fire. Why did that brief encounter disturb her so deeply? And why, when she finally spoke up, did the man she trusted most choose denial instead of listening? The tension between Huyen and her husband had been building quietly for some time, like pressure gathering beneath the surface. That day, it finally broke. Words were thrown carelessly, sharp enough to cut. Trust trembled on the edge of collapse. Was Huyen simply being overly sensitive, guided by intuition alone? Or was her fear a warning sign? Evidence that something darker was beginning to unfold. And above all, was judging truly failing as a husband when he chose to believe a stranger over his own wife? The morning market was as chaotic as ever. Vendors shouted prices. Shoppers weaved through narrow aisles, and the air was thick with the smell of fresh fish and vegetables. Huyen carried her small basket, moving almost on autopilot. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on dinner plans, on her family, on a vague feeling she couldn't quite name. She stopped at a stall selling water spinach, reaching out to inspect a bundle, when something across the aisle caught her eye. A man stood there, leaning slightly forward, talking to a woman. It was nothing remarkable at first, but then her heart skipped. That can't be Thomas. Huyen squinted, trying to see more clearly through the crowd. The man's posture, the way he shifted his weight, even the casual gesture of wiping sweat from his forehead. It was all too familiar. He looked exactly like Thomas, someone close to their family, someone she never expected to see here, in this place, with that woman. And the woman. Huyen's throat went dry. There was no mistaking her. Yi's ex-wife stood there, thinner than before, dressed simply, but still carrying that same sharp gaze and half smile that always seemed to hide something. They weren't standing especially close, but they weren't distant either. The man leaned in to listen as she spoke, and she stepped closer, as if worried someone might overhear. Huyen froze. No, this can't be happening. She tried to steady herself. People look alike all the time, she told herself. It could just be a coincidence. A stranger who happened to resemble Thomas. Forcing herself to breathe, she turned away and took a few steps. But she couldn't stop herself from looking back. At that exact moment, the man turned his head slightly in her direction. It was just a second, but it was enough. The chill that ran down her spine was unmistakable. That face, those eyes, it was him. Huyen quickly lowered her head, adjusting her hat to hide her face. Her heart pounded wildly as she gripped the basket so tightly her knuckles turned white. She didn't dare look again. It really was Thomas. The rest of the walk home felt heavy, each step slower than the last. Her mind raced with questions she didn't know how to answer. Was it coincidence? Or the beginning of something dangerous? By the time she reached home, the basket went untouched in the kitchen. She sat down, staring toward the door, waiting for the sound of Judging's motorcycle. Time stretched endlessly. When he finally arrived, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "Today, at the market," she said, her voice unsteady, "I saw something strange." Judging looked at her and immediately sensed something was wrong. He sat down, his tone calm. "What happened? Tell me." Huyen told him everything, from the familiar figure in the crowd to the moment their eyes almost met. She was careful not to accuse, not to state anything as fact. She only said that the man looked a lot like Thomas, and that the woman with him appeared to be his ex-wife. Silence filled the room. Judging's expression tightened. Doubt flickered briefly across his face, quickly replaced by irritation. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I can't say for certain," Huyen replied. "Maybe I'm wrong, but I can't shake this feeling. It's like someone is moving things behind our backs." He stood up and walked to the window, staring outside. Neither of them spoke. The unspoken questions hung heavy in the air. Later, the silence broke, but not gently. "You only said he looked like Thomas," Judging said, trying to stay composed. "Yes," Huyen replied. "That's all I said." "So what if he does?" he snapped. "Just because someone looks like him, you're going to start suspecting people?" Huyen stared at him, stunned. "I'm not making this up. You know me. I wouldn't say anything if I didn't feel something was wrong." "You're dragging Thomas into this," he shot back. "He's someone I trust. He helped me when I was at my lowest. Do you understand that?" Huyen let out a bitter laugh. "And I'm your wife. I tell you I'm scared, and you think I'm accusing someone without reason." The room felt frozen. "I don't want you imagining things," Judging said firmly. "You're doubting people closest to this family." "I doubt because I care," Huyen replied, standing up. "Do you know how that felt? Seeing someone who looked like Thomas with your ex-wife?" My heart dropped. "But you have no proof," he interrupted. "It's just a feeling. Just intuition." The words hit her like a blade. "So my intuition means nothing to you?" she asked quietly. "You trust him more than me, don't you?" Her voice shook. "You'd rather protect an outsider than listen to your own wife." "Don't twist my words." He raised his voice. "I can't accuse someone based on something so uncertain." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't need you to accuse anyone. I just need you to stand with me, to listen." "I am listening," he said, impatience creeping in. "No," she cried. "You're denying me." The house fell into a terrifying silence. "Do you know why I'm afraid?" Huyen said through tears. "Because your ex-wife has never brought anything good into this family. And yet you tell me not to worry." "That's over," he replied coldly. "Long ago." "For you, maybe," she said softly, "but not for me." He looked away. She smiled sadly. "Even now, you can't look at me." "I don't want to argue about something that might not even exist," he said. That sentence broke her. "So my feelings don't exist either." She stepped back, understanding something painful at last. "I thought if I was honest, you'd believe me," she said quietly. "I was wrong." She turned toward the bedroom. Before closing the door, she paused. "I hope I'm wrong. But if I'm right, you'll regret not trusting me today." The door closed. Judging stood alone in the living room, the ticking clock suddenly unbearable. A strange unease crept into his chest, the very feeling he'd dismissed moments earlier. On the other side of the door, Huyen collapsed to the floor, sobbing. The seed of doubt had been planted, and once trust begins to crack, no one knows what will fall first. The bedroom door had been closed for a long time, yet the sound of it still echoed in Judging's mind. He sat down heavily on the sofa, the house sinking into a deep, uncomfortable silence. No voices, no footsteps, just the steady ticking of the clock on the wall, as if it were counting every tangled thought inside his head. Judging rubbed his forehead and shut his eyes. He had been too harsh. The image of Huyen replayed in painful clarity, her red, swollen eyes, the way her voice trembled when she asked if he trusted her. He remembered the exact moment he chose silence instead of pulling her into his arms. His fists clenched. Huyen was never someone who imagined problems out of nowhere. She lived carefully, always putting this family first. If she hadn't truly felt something was wrong, she would never have spoken up. So why had he reacted the way he did? One name kept surfacing in his thoughts: Thomas. Thomas was more than just a friend. He was the person who had helped Judging through the darkest period of his life. Because of that, when Huyen mentioned him, Judging's instinct was to deny, to defend. Not because he was absolutely certain Thomas was innocent, but because he didn't want to believe he might be wrong about him. Judging opened his eyes and stared at the empty space in front of him. The image of Huyen standing alone in the middle of that crowded market tightened his chest. What if it really had been Thomas? What if it wasn't a coincidence at all? He stood up and began pacing the room. Fragments of memory surfaced, arranging themselves in a way that made his stomach turn. Lately, Thomas had been disappearing more often. His excuses were always vague. Calls came late at night. Messages were returned hours later. And then there were the questions. Questions about Huyen, about their private life. At the time, Judging had brushed it off as friendly concern. Now, it felt different. He stopped in front of the table and picked up his phone. His finger hovered, then slid to Thomas's name in his contacts. He didn't press call. Just seeing the name was enough to unsettle him. Huyen's concern hadn't come out of nowhere. His thoughts drifted to his ex-wife. That chapter of his life had ended badly, leaving scars he preferred not to touch. He had believed everything was long buried, but if she had truly resurfaced, it wouldn't be without purpose. And if she was involved with Thomas, the idea sent a chill through him. A coincidence too perfect, or something carefully planned? Huyen's final words echoed in his mind. "If I'm right, you'll regret it." His chest tightened. He had left her alone with her fear. The conflict in this family hadn't been caused by Thomas yet. It had been caused by his own lack of trust. Judging walked to the bedroom door and raised his hand, then hesitated. What could he say? An apology alone wouldn't be enough. He needed clarity. Not to protect his pride, but to protect his family. He turned away, resolve slowly forming. He wouldn't accuse anyone without proof, but he also wouldn't ignore the warning signs again. On the other side of the door, Huyen lay awake. Her tears had dried, but the heaviness remained. They were both awake, both trapped in their own doubts. Somewhere beyond these walls, Thomas, whether intentionally or not, had become the spark of a storm, quietly gathering strength. The house remained silent. A thin line of light slipped through the crack beneath the bedroom door. Judging stood in the hallway for a long time. That door had never felt so far away. Finally, he knocked softly. Huyen, he said, "You're still awake, aren't you?" Silence. Then her voice, low and distant. "Is something wrong?" The question alone made his heart sink. He took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped inside. Huyen lay on her side, her back to him. The warm yellow light cast soft shadows across her shoulders. Judging closed the door gently and stood there, unsure how to begin. "I came to apologize," he said. She didn't turn around. "Apologize? For what?" "For the way I spoke to you," he answered slowly. "And for not listening to you properly." Huyen let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "Are you apologizing because you saw me cry? Or because you truly think you were wrong?" Her question hung in the air. Judging moved closer and sat on the edge of the bed. "I overreacted," he admitted. "I let my emotions take over." "So you're apologizing for your tone," she said, "not because you didn't believe me." He bit his lip. He wanted to say more, to admit that doubt had already started creeping in. But he stopped himself. "Not yet." "I know you were scared," he said carefully. "I shouldn't have made you feel alone." Huyen turned to face him. Her eyes were red but dry now, drained of tears and filled with exhaustion. "Do you know what hurt the most?" she asked. "It wasn't Thomas. It was the fact that I shared my fear with you, and you treated it like a nuisance." "I'm sorry," he said again, more sincerely this time. She studied his face for a long moment. "You're still hiding something," she said quietly. Judging stiffened. "What do you mean?" "A thought, a doubt," she replied. "You don't fully trust me yet, do you?" He reached out instinctively, then pulled his hand back. "I don't want to make things worse," he said. "I don't want you to worry." "That's exactly what worries me," Huyen said. "Your silence." She hugged a pillow to her chest. "I don't need you to protect me by hiding the truth. I need you to stand with me, even if the truth is uncomfortable." Judging's chest tightened. "You're right," he said softly. "But I'm not ready to say it yet. Give me a little time." Huyen looked at him. Her gaze softened, but there was still distance there. "I'll give you time," she said, "but understand this. Every time you choose silence, you push me further away." He nodded. They lay down side by side, a small but noticeable space between them. The lamp remained on. Neither of them slept. An apology had been made, but the truth hadn't. And it was the unspoken truth that continued to erode their trust. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window. Huyen woke early, her movements calm and deliberate. In the kitchen, she prepared breakfast in silence, the steady rhythm of the knife against the cutting board echoing her thoughts. Something was going to happen today. She could feel it. Judging came out, looking tired. They exchanged a brief glance, said nothing. The calm between them felt fragile, like fog that could vanish at any moment. Then a motorcycle stopped in front of the house. Huyen's hand froze. A familiar knock sounded at the door. "Judging, Huyen, you're home." Thomas's voice called out. Huyen inhaled deeply, set the knife down, and opened the door with a gentle smile. "Thomas, come in." He stood there as always. Friendly smile, calm eyes, a presence that seemed harmless. He said he was just passing by. Huyen stepped aside to let him in. As he passed, she caught a familiar scent, the same perfume from the market. Her chest tightened, but her expression didn't change. Thomas sat down. Huyen poured him water, every movement precise. "And Maya?" Thomas asked casually, glancing around. "She's in her room," Huyen replied. Why? She's growing fast, he said with a smile. Last time I saw her, her clothes were already tight. I thought I'd take her to the market and buy her some new ones. The atmosphere shifted. No need, Judging said quickly. We'll handle it. It's no trouble, Thomas replied. I like children. To Huyen, the words sounded like an alarm. She went to call Maya. The little girl ran out happily, shouting, Uncle Thomas! Thomas crouched down, stroking her hair with unnecessary familiarity. You've grown so much. Huyen felt a chill. It's better another day, she said calmly. She has schoolwork today. It won't take long, Thomas insisted, smiling. Just a quick trip. Something flickered in his eyes. Haste, impatience. Huyen understood then. Maya was just an excuse. She took her daughter's hand. We'll go this weekend. Maya pouted but nodded. Thomas's smile faltered for just a second. Too bad. Huyen met his gaze. Thank you for your concern, she said evenly, but we'll take care of Maya ourselves. A brief silence fell. Thomas laughed lightly, brushed it off, and soon left. When the door closed, Huyen's smile vanished. Judging, she said firmly, from today on, don't let Maya go out alone with Thomas. He hesitated. Are you sure? Huyen nodded. I don't know what he's planning, but one thing is clear. She looked at the closed door. Thomas didn't come for Maya, she said quietly. He came with a plan. The unease in the house deepened, and this time, Judging could no longer deny it. An ordinary morning at a crowded market becomes the spark that threatens to tear a family apart. Huyen catches a glimpse of a man who looks exactly like Thomas, standing beside her husband's ex-wife, and a quiet sense of dread takes hold. When she shares her fear, her husband chooses denial over trust, igniting a painful conflict that exposes old wounds and fragile loyalties. Words spoken in anger push them apart, while unanswered questions begin to pile up. As strange patterns around Thomas slowly emerge, and his sudden interest in their daughter raises alarm, Huyen realizes this may not be coincidence at all. Trust has already cracked, and suspicion is growing stronger by the day. Is Huyen's intuition a warning meant to save her family, or the beginning of a dangerous misunderstanding? The truth is still hidden, and the next move could change everything.